Good afternoon, everyone. Carahsoft Technology would like to welcome you to our Security Compass webinar. Today, we are lucky enough to have Jay Ryan, U.S. Federal Government Program Manager for Security Compass, and Joseph Rowe, U.S. Federal Government Solutions Engineer for Security Compass, joining us. I will now hand the floor over to both of you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. A little bit about myself, Jay Ryan, U.S. Federal Program Manager here at Security Compass. Our U.S. federal program encompasses about 16 federal customers across both the DoD and the federal entities themselves. We have a lot of diverse use cases. And the one we're really going to talk about today is delivery of secure software and kind of the ATO and continuous ATO concept that the majority of our customers utilize our product SD Elements for. A little bit after that discussion, my compatriot here, Joseph Rowe, who is our solutions engineer, is going to jump in and provide a demonstration of SD Elements. At any point in time, should you have questions, please do raise those in the question box. We would do our best to answer those in line. So Olivia, Carahsoft team, if you want to tee those up for me, if you see any ones that are pertinent or pressing come in, happy to answer those in line. Otherwise, we can wait and tackle those towards the end. So today, SD Elements are supports DevSecOps in the federal ecosystem. Again, my name is Jay Ryan, U.S. Federal PM here at Security Compass, and joined today by Joseph Rowe, our solution engineer for the U.S. Fed side. All right, so what is in our discussion today for you? That's the big thing. If you showed up today and taken your valuable time, we appreciate you being here. We hope when you walk away from this conversation with us after learning about who we are, what we do, and then hopefully us having a little bit of a back and forth about how we do it within our federal ecosystem. You learn a little bit about how to reduce vulnerabilities and deliver secure code faster for your federal customers or yourself if you are, in fact, a federal developer. The ability to track compliance with standards more easily is really something that we pride ourselves on and enabling for our government customer base. So happy to jump in and talk about that in depth. Our big one is how can you achieve ATO and CATO faster? That is the holy grail that we're all chasing. A number of advancements out there in the federal industry that we have also integrated with our process flow. I'm happy to discuss and pull the thread on a little further. And then really at the core of what we're talking about today, scaling those DevSecOps best practices across your software portfolio to enable your devs to work at really speed of mission, right? Getting things out there to the end users is really what it's all about. And that's kind of our core mission here at SD Elements as well, as to enable those core customers to get what they need in the field in a timely manner to better serve their customer base, whether that's the federal side and our internal civilian workforce and all of our men and women here in the country, or on the other side of the fence with DoD and some of the other civil services to support the missions outwardly facing and pushing security and ensuring that those operators and folks on the front end have everything they need in a timely manner. So a little bit about us. Our mission is to comply with U.S. federal government and Department of Defense application security standards. So we're talking NIST 853, et cetera, the majority of the 800 series. And we'll jump into everything we cover and encompass, but we have over 70 plus different standards available inside of our library. But again, 853 and RMF are typically the bread and butter everyone's looking for. And that's kind of the lens with which we will view our discussion today. The ability to release secure software and obtain ATO faster, that's our end goal with everything that we do in our process workflow, is to enable you as operators, developers, cybersecurity professionals to use SD Elements to make that happen. And then to enable secure coding best practices at scale. So something that we don't typically speak to in a lot of areas, which we're increasing this year, is our ability to train and build security champions in the security pipeline to educate your developers, whether that's using our e-learning modules to develop your workforce, make them more capable and competent security practitioners as well, or using our built-in just-in-time training inside of SD Elements, which we'll touch on as well. So if you're a dev and maybe you haven't touched a specific security problem in a good bit of time, maybe it's been in your annual training, it's been over a year, but you need a quick 2 to 3 minute approved process to make something happen. We have a lot of digestible, compressed, just-in-time training modules to help you get there. So just a little bit about us. We are across the board available inside of the US Fed space. We are in Iron Bank. You can go down and download our secured containers inside Iron Bank. We're also on Big Bang. A lot of people don't know that. We're available for Big Bang usage and deployment. So if you have a Big Bang use case, we'd be happy to talk to you about how to make that happen. We're proud to be in some of the large leading software factories from the very beginning here for a number of years and to be used in their ATO, CATO processes, and very proud to support them in their mission sets. So getting into some of the meat and potatoes discussion here, what's preventing adoption of DevSecOps by design? So big thing is still manual work. If you're a dev on here, maybe you can commiserate with this stat, but a lot of devs are struggling. 42% are struggling with compliance requirements. And where do we get this stat from? So every year we do a deep dive into the federal community. We have a third-party consulting service which goes out and books interviews with all the devs in the federal space as much as possible to get respondents to answer a lot of leading questions, very similar to the DORA metrics, very similar to leading DevSecOps principles, to understand what the challenges are inside of that federal landscape. And so a lot of these key points we'll talk about here come from that process. And so again, still struggling with manual security compliance, spreadsheets, sending things back and forth through your Jira backlog, one-to-one, having a hard time tracking these things. Even with pushing them all the way up to GRC tools like EMAS and Exacta, the back and forth, the lack of a streamlined process is what is causing a lot of manual work and adding time to that ATO, CATO, and DevSecOps design process. Scaling challenges. So we know there's already a problem inside of cybersecurity. We know that there's not enough skilled cyber workers to fill the demand. And we have the same problem on the development side. There are just not enough application security experts with the current AppSec to developer ratio being about 1 to 100 roughly. So we see the ability to go ahead and fill this void by helping you scale your AppSec team, where that's developers who can also, enhance their security skills and grow their ability to support your team through that AppSec effort. That's where we think we solve some of this problem. And collaboration. So where security falls inside of the SDLC, the security development lifecycle. A concerning stat was that 74% of developers, the first time that they first time that they actually encounter their security team is when they hit a gate, long after they've already started coding, right? They're well into the process. They've got the app designed out. They've gone down the path of assigning and building out the backlog, and they've gotten to work in their coding. And then when they go to push something across the board for initial release into dev, they hit that security wall. Sometimes they didn't know that security wall existed. Other times they do, they just didn't know what they needed to come to the table with to pass that security wall. So we gotta fix that. We gotta make it quicker. We need to build this all the way into the very beginning. Secure by design is really what we're pushing for. So there we go. I leaked it. We need to build a security by design culture to overcome these challenges. Again, looking at the SDLC here, I think we're all very familiar by now with the affinity loop here for SDLC. We really see shifting all the way to the left to the beginning, secure by design, as the way to overcome a lot of these hurdles. And this is really what we preach and put forward with our concepts here at Security Compass for SD Elements. And that includes the plan and code phase, embedding that training, growing your AppSec professionals, giving them the tools and resources they need from the very start to be able to build securely and code effectively from the very beginning. Threat modeling. So if those of you who aren't familiar, threat modeling is actually a core component of the EO, the executive order that came out across the last year. It's embedded in the SSDF. There are a lot of directives now coming down that are requiring threat modeling. And what we've really found with our engagement with the federal community is we are all woefully behind the curve in the execution of that threat modeling. There's not really a dedicated persona inside a lot of the Fed instances for executing on the threat model. A lot of time, they're not really doing it in line with some of the defined standards, such as STRIDE. They're taking essentially old school, we've all seen this, wire diagrams, Visio diagrams of network topology and using that as the threat model. And that's really leaving a lot of layers of possible vulnerabilities on the table that aren't being assessed and aren't being met in this early life cycle. And then, of course, we get into everyone's favorite, the security requirements. Show of hands, probably out there, who is an expert at 853 controls and the countermeasures to answer those controls and do it correctly from the beginning. I can tell you I live, eat, sleep, and breathe this, and I am still not an expert. Every day is something new. Every advancement, every new threat that comes to the door creates a new wrinkle in that entire process. And so it's really, having been at the front line for a number of these things, it's great to come now and into this phase of the industry and see where we're managing this and where we have the capacity to really grab a hold of this and take this in the right direction. So 853, all of your NIST controls, ISO 27001. Maybe you're now having to ingest SSDF because you're a third-party contractor. You need to attest to the COTS software that you're providing to the government. Maybe you're a GOTS developer. And it's on you to attest to the controls so you can go and get your certificate field or integrate your individual piece into a larger level of effort. It's going to be on you now to understand these security requirements and be able to manage these. And so we provide you the tool set to do so and the expertise. And we want to continue to push this into a larger body of secure coding, DevSecOps by design, security by design culture. So how have we done that internally? We've designed a 3E framework. So I've kind of hinted to all of this, but we look at it as a pyramid. So the base, of course, is your education, your application security training, and we enable your ability for your teams to do that. Embed. So we have ISC squared accreditation processes for secure app development, a number of courses available for you to take to push for that. And of course, what we're here to talk about today, the empowerment piece, and that's our product SD elements and the just-in-time training modules. All right, let's get into ATO and CATO. Of course, continuous authority to operate is the holy grail. We've all been pushing forward across the last 2-3 years since some of the initial findings on why software development is broken. It's never done. With the memos and everything that's come out, it's continually in flux, but it's something that a number of organizations have achieved, and we've been a part of that process, very proud to have been a part of that process. So typically the issue is getting the paperwork done is slow. It's hard to scale. Again, that limited security expertise, hard to communicate across silos internal to your organization. Oftentimes, your dev team is not the ones that speak directly with the security team, and that game of telephone coming back and forth, or the what you have to interpret based upon the spreadsheets or emails is difficult to get you to the goal of getting across to meeting those security hurdles. And then identifying early your weaknesses in your application, your code and design. So that's integration with the rest of your tool sets, your SAST, your DAST, and other capacities, getting that data back all in one holistic place to allow you to overcome these hurdles. So we do that through our CATO compliance workflow. Essentially, the way that we address this problem is we start with a survey. And that survey can be our walkable survey inside of SD Elements. It can also be done through a threat modeling process. So you do a visual diagram of the application you're trying to build. Either way, you characterize your project, identify, the applicable regulation you're starting with, 853. If you're embedding other tool set, or other regulations inside of there, you can create a very detailed and defined regulation purview there and pull all those things into essentially assessment. From there, after you answer the survey or the individual threat model itself, it's going to translate automatically which controls essentially come into alignment to your project. From there, as a security manager, if you're a cybersecurity persona, maybe you lead the team and you push these controls down to your devs, which is the ideal workflow. You would assign these to your developers in your backlog, essentially where they work. So with SD Elements, we don't want your devs to have to come and work inside of SD. We want you to have the capacity to manage what they do. They show up to work. They jump into Jira, they jump into Git. Everything's there for them, waiting the way that they already do things. So there's no change. But what they get is way more intelligent. They get a detailed breakdown of the tasks they need to accomplish to be compliant with the individual controls. It gives them a breakdown of how to do so. It gives them some just-in-time training, code snippets, everything they need to accomplish what you're assigning to them. From there, you can get integrated information back into that workflow. We can verify through SAST and DAST tooling inputs, everything back in SDE that you've accomplished. And then from there, we push towards the accreditation process. We have detailed reporting, which allows you to export reports or export into formats to be ingested by your GRC tools. However, your assessors like to work best and want to see a chain of trust of how the developers built that piece of software from the very beginning. is what we enable at scale to allow you to speed this process up and scale towards ATO, CATO. So just a little peek here at our library. We have a major content library, again, from the Fed side that covers the majority of all Fed requirements, all baked in and mapped and aligned to everything you would need to see based upon what your specific lookout or outlook is, rather, inside of AppSec development. We have an extensive support for integrations as well. So if you're using your issue trackers, as we spoke to, Jira or Git, or a number of others, however you're getting work done with your devs, use SaaS and DaaS tools, the leading SaaS and DaaS tools inside of the community now. Bring that data back into SDE, helps you validate everything you're doing and everything you've done. And the push to CI/CD and governance, so GRC. We also support EMAS as well. So we have an export opportunity where you can export all of your data out of SD elements directly into EMAS, import that data there. It's going to map everything you've done to meet your control sets into EMAS, so you can demonstrate completely your compliance with NIST 853. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to turn it over to my compatriot here, Joe Rowe. He's going to jump in and provide a demo of SD elements, barring any pressing questions here that I'm not seeing on my screen.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jay. And thank you everyone for taking the time. Again, my name is Joseph Rowe, and I'll be walking you through the demonstration today. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So again, I'll be walking you through the demonstration today. I'm going to start a little bit backwards. So we're going to kind of start at the end state, and then we'll kind of go back and we'll see how we got here. So first off, what you're looking at right now, you can see an application security compliance report. And this is one that I've run for NIST 800-53 Rev 5. And we also have Rev 4 available as well. And so as you go through and you progress with SD elements, you have the ability to run these project reports. They can give you very good insights into where you stand against your security posture or a particular compliance standard. So let's take a moment to take a look at this NIST 800-53 Rev 5 report. So you'll notice down here, I get an introduction, and then we're going to start to break this down section by section based on how I answered this. So you can see that once we get to AC2.1 here, we do have a couple of things that are in scope. And the way that this works is I'll get a description of what this section entails. I'll then get this broken down phase by phase, what's in scope based on how I answer my survey. So we can see here, we've got one from architecture and design. We've got one from testing. We've got a couple from the activities phase. And then we have a couple that are not in scope for this particular project. Not only do we have what's in scope based on how we answered our survey, but we've got the information on these individual countermeasures themselves as well. Where we can see the priority, the status as it is right now from SD elements, who was the last person that modified that status, when was it modified, what does the scan tool have to say, if anything, and then who last either brought in that scan or did the manual verification on it. Now, as Jay kind of mentioned, we have a lot of our clients that we've helped that a couple of them have achieved a continuous ATO from what they consider, and a lot of them have achieved a much more rapid ATO. Sometimes taking this down from 10 to 12 months into 2 to 3 months, and like I said, a couple are continuous, and we've been a big part of that process. Obviously, we're not the only part of that process. We've got the people and the processes in place, right? But a lot of organizations, they do have to run through us. They're going to go through the survey that I'm going to show you in a minute. SD elements will run those answers through. It's going to decide on some countermeasures to threats and weaknesses that we've identified that are tracking against your standard that you put into place, whether it's NIST, RMF, or something else. And those get sent to the developers as actionable guidance, right? That they can actually action upon. It's not just, hey, you need to do this, and how do I do this? So I'm going to go into that here in a moment. This is at the project level, but we also have a full customizable dashboard as well. So you can make these for the different types of people that may need to see different information. I kind of created this one real quick. Maybe I want to see the NIST 800-53 compliance across my entire organization and my individual apps. I can kind of hover over them. Maybe I want to see my risk policies, my most common weaknesses that we're experiencing as a result of our organization, or even the incomplete task on a project by project basis. And I'll kind of get into more of this at the end as we go through this and how you can customize these and kind of get the data that you need to present to people at a moment's notice. All right, so let's kind of work back from where we went there first. So real quick, just to recap, I'm going to start with a project survey. And essentially, we are answering the question of what are we building today? What is this application? How does it behave? What are the technologies in use? What are some compliance requirements that maybe we need to adhere to? How are we deploying this, et cetera? From there, SD Elements is going to take these answers and it's going to run this through its rules engine and decide on some threats and weaknesses and some countermeasures that we should apply to mitigate those that are tracking against the standard that's been put into place, whether that's NIST or something else. Those get sent off into an issue tracking system to where the developers can work through them. We do have a bidirectional sync there, so they can mark it off that it's been complete right then and there within that issue tracker. And when it's done, it will transfer back into SD Elements, and we will have that traceability back into those reports that I showed you earlier. I can also then bring in additional SAST and DAS scanners to give you a validation piece on top of that, because most organizations are going to want more than just a developer saying that they've done this. And then we can talk a bit more about that reporting functionality. Now, as we go through the survey, a lot of people will ask, well, who's going to fill this out? And it does vary between organizations. But one thing that sets us apart is it doesn't have to be a security subject matter expert, right? This could be someone that's very familiar with the application at hand. Could be a lead developer, could be a project manager. It could be that SME, or it could be 2 or 3 of those people in tandem as they work through this. Now, generally speaking, we say that this will probably take about 30 minutes to go through. And as you mature, there are mechanisms in place that you can apply to bring that down, including profiles that can be created that can pre-answer a lot of the questions up front. But let's say about 30 minutes. Now, I'm going to walk through this pretty quickly because really what we want to see is what comes out as a result. But nonetheless, we will walk through this. So today I've told SD Elements that we're building the Java TE web app. And because I have selected this profile, it's going to pre-answer some of these questions for me. One of which is that I have a web application in development here. That's one of my components. If I wanted to bring something else into scope here, like a backend or something, I could check it off and bring it in as well. Now, on architecture environment, we're answering specifics, right? Is this doing a microservice or an IoT ecosystem? Maybe this contains multiple components that communicate through a network. Context and characteristics, what is this application doing? Is it a financial application by chance? Does it handle health data? Maybe we're consuming or providing cloud services. Now, when we talk about platform and language within SD Elements, I think Jay mentioned it, but we have over 2,000 countermeasures that are included with this as it stands right now, and then around 4,000 amendments. But they largely start off as being platform and language agnostic. However, when we answer these additional questions, like the programming language or the technologies that we're using, it allows us to dynamically bring in additional content to further help the developers, like code snippets or how-tos. Perhaps maybe I'm using Nginx on my web server, and we'll get a walkthrough for that. Same thing with database technologies, right? Maybe we're using MySQL, and we can get a walkthrough of how to properly configure that. Java technology, since this is a Java app, and then also the data formats that we're using. Now, features and functions is strictly dealing with how are we handling things like authentication or authorization, password, session management. What about our external dependencies? What protocols are in use at both the application and the network layer? And then an area I do like to highlight are the compliance requirements. So an organization can immediately come in here and say, hey, what laws am I subject to? And probably for most people on this, we're just strictly going to be dealing with the USA, but we do have the other ones here as well if necessary. And we do have coverage for things like industrial control systems, cloud, privacy. And what's probably more interesting to you are the US federal and NIST standards. So yes, if this does happen to be in scope for 800-53, we can select that here, select the impact level that we're tracking against. And we do have additional coverage for like the privacy controls, the optional controls, the new executive order, right? The cybersecurity framework, SSDF, CMMC, DIACAP, ASD STIG, and even CNSSI with its overlays as well. As Jay mentioned, there's more than 77 at this point in time. Further on, onto development test tools. What are we using to help build this? Static and dynamic code analysis in play, and we're using OAuth tools. And I do also like to highlight the deployment options. So in addition to kind of, the secure coding, the hardware, all the stuff that we have coverage for, we have added in a bunch of guidance for the most popular cloud providers. So if you happen to be using AWS or Azure or GCP, you can come in here and select the individual services that you're using, whether that's Lambda for AWS, or maybe you're using Key Vault or Monitor for Azure services, and you will receive guidance on how to properly configure, deploy, and secure those based off of CIS benchmarks. The same thing goes with containerization technology, Docker, Kubernetes, OpenShift, Swarm. Now, one thing that's going to be constant throughout this entire demonstration today is everything here is configurable, even this survey. So you as an organization are likely to have security requirements that are unique to you, and you can most certainly ask those questions and have the answers trigger off custom countermeasures. Very easy everything is done through templates. There's no coding required. And just to kind of illustrate that here, I've added in this section. Maybe you've got a centralized auth system at your organization. And if they're going to use that centralized auth system, maybe we're taking care of some things by way of inheritance, like password reset or use multi-factor or things like that. And we can easily set that up through the templates within SD elements. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I will confirm my changes. And we're going to go ahead and here in a moment is we will publish and continue on to our summary. And from here, it's going to ask us to select a risk policy for this particular application. And think of this as setting a minimum bar that an application needs to clear in order for it to be considered compliant. And ultimately, this is a filter on what gets brought into scope. And we allow you to set these up for the different types of applications that you have, because you may have different applications that need different levels of scrutiny. Or you may have different applications that have different standards they have to adhere to. Like maybe this one's CNSSI and this one's, NIST, and this one's completely something else differently. So you can set these up to really dial in the granularity of making sure that your applications are properly secured, but at the same time, only sending over the appropriate stuff so we're not overwhelming our developers with a bunch of stuff. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more depth here in a minute. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply this NIST RMF risk policy. And this is stating at this point in time, it's only going to bring into scope countermeasures associated with NIST RMF and only those within the threshold that I've set. And we can always adjust this at a later time. If, for instance, we'd actually like to go through and get some of the lower hanging fruit or some of the lower important stuff, we can easily do that. But here in a moment, you're going to see this brought up in a phased approach that mimics the software development lifecycle. Everything from your pre-planning activities all the way to your requirements, your architecture and design, your development, your deployment, and your testing. And you're going to notice that these are ranked out on a priority scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest risk, 1 being the lowest. And that's based off the common weakness scoring system by MITRE, also slightly adjusted by our team of researchers. Over here on the left, you've got the status as it is right now from SD elements. Is it complete? Is it incomplete? Maybe it's not applicable to this. Maybe you've done something like you've accepted the risk. Okay. Big part of what we're asking here, and Jay kind of mentioned it up front, we're asking developers to really start thinking about security and the standard up front. You want to do this as close to the design phase as you possibly can, or when you first start making changes to your existing software, so that they have the guidance up front and they can then implement these within the standard that they're being required to. At the same time, the problem with this, generally speaking, is a lot of developers aren't security experts. And even for the ones that are, they're probably not experts on NIST RMF or CNSSI 1253 or various other standards. So we've really got to give them everything that they need in order to be successful. So let's take a look at one of these from the perspective of a developer. And I'm going to pick something that's pretty universal and standard here. Like, let's say I'm a developer and I've been assigned this countermeasure here. Ensure all data in transit is encrypted in a secure TLS channel. Okay. Well, maybe as a developer, I'm not quite sure how to do this. So first things first, I've got the weakness written out very plainly, very easy to understand, but it does give me a good understanding of why this is important. Further on, I've got links to the common weakness enumeration database where I can click through, learn more about the problem, learn mitigation strategies. What's more, I've actually got the solution written out for me step by step. How do I actually go about accomplishing this in the right way? For instance, right, do not support SSL, of course, provide support for TLS, refusing secure ciphers, etc. Got additional guidance on how it enforces on all pages. Further information on the choice of cipher that you're making, along with some recommended ciphers here as well that you can use. And then down at the bottom, we do have some dynamic content that's come in. So for example, I did say that we're using Lambda for AWS. And since that's relevant to this task at hand, this section has been brought in here. And also down at the bottom, we've got additional content that is technology specific, that is made to help the developers more fully. So maybe at this point, they've gone through this and they're like, okay, well, that solution that helps me a lot. That's more than what I usually have access to. But perhaps I could still use a little bit more information or help. And we got them covered. So Jay kind of referred to this. We do have what we refer to as just-in-time training courses. And these are short courses. They're 5 to 10 minutes in length that a developer can take right within their workflow. Take the class, learn about the problem, take what they've learned right then and there and implement it within that same workflow. And we believe this is beneficial to them as opposed to what they normally see, which is usually security training maybe once or twice a year where they're drinking from a fire hose. They oftentimes don't have to use it immediately. and they haven't retained a lot of that knowledge. This is right here at the point of need. In addition, the vast majority of our how-tos will also include our countermeasures will also include how-tos. And these are, again, are specific to the technologies. So it might be something like a code snippet, and we've got that in Java here because we said we're using Java. Or how do I harden my Nginx TLS implementation? And we'll actually walk you through that right here. Or how do I enable an encrypted connection to my database engine? And again, specific examples, we said MySQL, so we got that example coming in here as well. So these are created by our team. They are fully vetted. They're obviously, free to use for help, and we stay on top of them constantly. With that said, they want to note, much like that survey that I just showed you, these countermeasures are fully configurable as well. Maybe you have a little bit more specific way about going about this. Maybe you have your own code repositories, code samples you want to link to, or maybe you can have your own trainings, and you can very easily bring those in through templates again. No coding is required. This, however, is all within SD elements. We kind of talked about how we don't want the developers to have to go through SD elements. So what I've done here is we've actually got that same countermeasure, and we've done the integration in with Jira. And I've got that same walkthrough, right? How do I do this? What's my solution? How do I enforce this on all pages? My choice was Cypher again. And then down at the bottom, I'm still going to have access to those code samples, right? The how-tos. And as you can see, this is actually synced with an Apache server rather than an Nginx. So I got that example here. So they do put out different dynamic content based on the inputs. And even those just-in-time training courses are available right here within Jira or Azure DevOps, or one of the other 10 or so issue trackers that we support. They can get all of that information right here. They work through it where they're working today. The developers don't have to learn SD elements. That can be your compliance or your security people on the back end. And as they completed it, they just come over here, mark it off as done. We do have a bi-directional sync, so SD elements can capture that, and it will have insight into who did what and when we get back to our reports at the end. Quick recap. We fill out the survey. SD elements put those answers through its rules engine, right? The rules engine has come up with countermeasures to potential threats and weaknesses that it's identified that are tracking against the standard. In this case, NIST RMF, right? Those have been sent off to your developers. And maybe at this time, we have started to, developers have started to mark some of this stuff as complete. Okay. So at this point in time, you're probably going to want additional validation that this has actually been done correctly. And that's where your scans are going to come into place here. So we do have integrations in with the most popular scan tools. There are many of them that are supported, but essentially we have a two-pronged kind of approach here. You can see on the left side, the status from SD elements, which oftentimes is coming from your developers. And over on the right side, you may have noticed that some of these have colored flags next to them. And that colored flag indicates that we have some sort of result either from one of our scanners or somebody did a manual verification on it and they updated that. And if I click through to this, we can see exactly what we found. So we've got this red flag here. And you'll notice I have multiple different scanners available. And we've got a red flag because both Veracode and Fortify are both reporting issues. And if we click through to them, we can see exactly what it found. So for example, Fortify found 5 counts of path manipulation in regards to use of indirect object reference maps with accessing files. Okay, let's say maybe your developer, they'd signed off on this and they'd mark this complete, but yeah, when you run your scans and you bring this in, we've got an obvious problem here. We got 5 counts. You can actually set up SD elements the behavior that when it receives this result, it can automatically change this back to incomplete, send it back in the developer's backlog, have them work back through it, correct what was wrong, at which point they can resubmit, we can rescan, and we can check for adherence. Okay. Ideally, though, the point of this, if this is being done correctly, if your developers are working through this or taking the guidance as recommended and implementing it as they're told to, then at that point in time, what you should be mostly seeing are green flags, right? And Corey's green means that we're getting a good back to go from the scanner. We have confidence in that result. And then we've also got the developer attestation over here. And we can pull both of these things together at the end to give you that peace of mind. One other thing I did want to mention is that from time to time, you may see an orange flag up here. And an orange flag essentially means that, hey, this scanner is not reporting back any problems, but based on what we know about that particular scanner, scanners in general, we don't have a lot of confidence in that result. So we're saying, hey, this is potentially a false negative. And we do include testing cases with all of our countermeasures. So If for some reason, your scanner can't test for something with confidence, we do have a testing case available for you. And you can put something in here like, okay, we're going to add a manual verification. I can change the status to passed. I can say something like testing case 26, passed. And we'll capture this again when we run our reports at the end as well. Okay. Now, I did talk briefly about this risk policy. We said that you can set these up for your different types of applications. Ultimately, these give you the ability for SD elements to say, hey, this meets a standard, or no, it does not. And you have very granular control over that. And they can always be updated and changed as you kind of progress and mature in this as well. The other area where these come into play is the potential to put automated gates or guardrails on your CI/CD build pipelines. And the way that it works is this. Let's say, for instance, you're using something like Jenkins or Azure pipelines, right? Maybe you've got an application that's running on 2-week sprints. The 2 weeks are up, it goes to build. But before it does, you've done the integration with SD elements. So Jenkins is going to say, hey, SD elements, can you give me the status of this risk policy? And then based on the response that Jenkins or Azure pipelines gets back, it can make a decision on its side. So of course, if it's compliant, nothing changes. It builds as it normally would, right? Everything goes through fine. But let's say it's non-compliant. Like maybe this application is not meeting the standard that we set for it. Well, maybe in this particular case, this is not a critical application and it's not going into production. So maybe you want to still build it, but you want to flag it and mark it as unstable. So it's not meeting the standard. Okay, that's a possibility. The other option is, let's say maybe this is a very critical application and in no way, shape, or form do you want this being built if it doesn't meet the standard, then you can have it put the gates down completely and fail the build. Right? Completely optional, but the functionality is there to put automated gates or guardrails on the CI/CD build pipelines should you need them there. Okay, so I did talk a few things. We kind of started at the reports. I did want to let you know that there are more than just the compliance reports, but there are 5 different reports that you can run on a project basis. They give you varying insights into this particular project that we're just working through. The dashboards can give you the overall view. But the other one that I did want to kind of show you, since I did show you the compliance report earlier, is the weakness summary report. And this just goes to secure by design. So this is a report that we can run in a matter of seconds. And it's going to give us a snapshot of where our application sits in regards to the high, medium, and low priority weaknesses. What's been assigned to mitigate each one of them, right? Who's done what and when, and what are our scanned or our manual verifications have to say. And this is going to look very similar to what you saw in the compliance report, but instead of breaking it down section by section of the compliance, they'll do it weakness by weakness. And we start with a weakness summary table, which will give you insights into every single potential weakness that we've identified, from the highest risk all the way down to the lowest risk. And as you can see, it's very extensive. But then we start to break this down weakness by weakness. So you can see here, for example, we've got improper identity management for the cloud. We'll get a brief description of what this is. And then we can see that these 2 countermeasures have been assigned to mitigate this particular weakness. And not only do we get the countermeasures, but we also get the information on them as well, right? What's the priority? What's the status from SD elements? Who last modified it? When did that user last modify it? And what does the scan tool or the manual verification have to say? So very similar to what you saw in the compliance report, just a different way of looking at things. Now, I did want us to take a moment to stop and kind of go back to the dashboards, because we did talk about how this is completely customizable. And as you can see, if I kind of go into the dashboards, I've got multiple different ones that are available here. These are different ones that I've created. We have one that it comes with automatically, but essentially you have the ability to come in and create your dashboards from the concept of advanced reports that we have within SD Elements. And the advanced reports, as you can see when I come over here, I've created a whole bunch of these. And you have the option to either create them from kind of our pre-canned templates, like for example, which you can then load up and actually make adjustments to in your dimensions that you want in your measurables and how you want to visualize this. Or you can create these completely from a blank template, right? Completely from scratch. And I can come in here and I can, name these, like we'll call this new 2. We can give it a little description. And then ultimately we can decide the reporting context that we want to pull from. What do we want as our dimensions? Do we want our application name? Do we want our business unit name as well? And then what do we want as our measurables? Like maybe we want to measure our application compliance percentage or application non-compliance percentage. And then how do we want to go about visualizing this? Like maybe I want to visualize this as a stacked vertical bar, for example, or maybe I want it as a horizontal bar, right? Once I do this, I can come in and I can create this. And then we can go back to our dashboards and we can ultimately decide, how do we want to build these up? Like, for example, I want to name this new dashboard. I can come in here and say, all right, we'll give another description, and then I can decide which reports I want to bring into this. Like, do I want a GDPR report, or do I want to see my integrations, or do I want to see, my compliance status for 853? And I can start to move these around and kind of work them to fit my needs as they go through this. Very easy to do, and also very powerful, because just about every piece of data that's within SD elements can be generally retrieved from these. And at the same time, let's say, for example, maybe you have your own dashboards and you've already got dashboards in place. Well, all of this is available via the APIs too. So you can pull that same data into another dashboarding system as long as the other system can access a REST-based API. And while I'm on that API note, that pretty much goes with about everything else as well. Nearly anything that you saw me do through this demonstration today, from filling out that survey to updating countermeasure statuses, making notes on things, right, updating control statuses, we can all do that through the API as well. If you have other systems that you saw the list of integrations that we have that maybe we don't have a native integration for, a lot of our clients have been able to build those out through the APIs too. And again, generally any data that's accessible is through those two. So we can very much take you through those. All right, that's kind of what I show on a kind of first overall walkthrough. I did want to thank everyone for taking the time. And I guess at this point in time, I will kick this back over to Alex, I believe.
Yes, perfect. So I'll go ahead and start reading off some questions. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to type them in. The first question we have is, how do you attach evidence to the completed controls? Same with test result verbiage.
Yeah, so a couple of different things. So we have a two-pronged control way about going about this. We take the developer attestation, and then we also take either the scans or the manual verification. Now, if you're wanting to attach, say, verification, we do have a place where you can add notes into the actual SD elements as well on the individual countermeasures. So you can put a note in. Also from Jira, you have the ability to enter notes there and have them passed on. So if you want to link to like some documentation or something, that can be done that way.
Perfect. Another one is, what customers within the federal market are currently using SD elements for their ATO compliance programs?
Yeah, we spoke to a couple of these earlier. We have 3 customers inside of the Department of the Air Force, major software factories using us for the CATO process. We also have SEC and a number of others external to the DoD who have also implemented SD elements for this purpose.
All right. And how does Security Compass keep their compliance materials up to date?
That's actually a great question. So you saw my slide from the coverage of all the library. Joseph also spoke to the availability of all of that. You saw what was available to you to answer from a control standpoint. So we have a pretty robust research team, which we're very proud of. A number of PhD level folks work on that team. I think about 10 to 15 of them. And they're constantly evaluating the new regulations as they become available in the draft form so that we stay ahead of the curve. So if, case in point, when 853 V5 dropped, we actually had it ready to go before it was even made for public. Essentially, we stayed up to date with the draft. The team was aligned with everything that was going on. And we had a 90% solution ready to go with the final tweak as soon as the final draft was ready. So we are always ensuring we're plugged into that process.
Excellent. All right. So let me. All right. I would like to thank all of our participants for joining, as well as Jay and Joseph for presenting and answering our questions. We hope today's presentation has been helpful for you and your organization. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, feel free to contact the Security Compass team at Carahsoft. Our contact information is displayed, so please don't hesitate to call or email us. Thank you again and have a great day.